Eleanor Grayson stood on the porch of her own home, the one she'd built with her late husband, Arthur, 40 years ago. The wood creaked beneath her feet, each grown a reminder of the life they'd carved out together, 2 kids, countless Christmases, and a garden that still bloomed with Arthur's roses. At 70, Eleanor's hands were weathered, her silver hair tied back in a loose bun, but her eyes held a spark that age couldn't dim. This house was her heart, her history, and now it was slipping through her fingers. Her son, Michael, had moved back in 3 years ago with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids. Eleanor had welcomed them, thinking it temporary a chance to help her family through tough times. She'd given them the master bedroom, taken the small guest room for herself, and even started paying for groceries to ease their burden. But Sarah, with her sharp tongue and sharper ambitions, had other plans. It started with small demands. Eleanor, we need more space for the kids. Then came the redecoration. Arthur's old study turned into a playroom, his books boxed up and shoved into the attic. Eleanor bit her tongue, telling herself it was for her grandchildren. But 6 months ago, Sarah crossed a line. This house is too big for you to manage alone, she'd said, her voice cold as she stood in the kitchen, arms crossed. We're family, so we'll let you stay, but you need to start paying rent. $800 a month. Or you can find somewhere else. Eleanor's heart sank. Rent. In her own home. The home she and Arthur had paid for with sweat and sacrifice, where every brick held a memory. She'd looked to Michael, hoping for support, but he avoided her gaze, muttering something about fairness. Betrayal stung worse than the demand itself. She'd raised Michael to be kind, to value family, but he'd changed under Sarah's influence, becoming a stranger who wouldn't meet her eyes. For months, Eleanor paid. She dipped into her savings, the modest nest egg she'd saved for emergencies. Each check she wrote felt like a piece of her soul chipped away. She paid for the right to sleep in her own bed, to walk her own halls. But the tension grew. Sarah's comments grew sharper. You're slowing us down. Eleanor and Michael's silence louder. The kids, once her joy, were kept at a distance, their laughter muffled behind closed doors. One evening, as Eleanor sat in her cramped guest room, she found an old photo of Arthur. His smile, warm and steady, seemed to speak to her across the years. We built this for us, she whispered, tracing his face. Not for them to take. That night, something shifted. The spark in her eyes flared into resolve. She wasn't just a tenant in her own life. This was her house, and she'd fight for it. The next morning, Eleanor stopped at the bank. Her name was still on the deed, Michael, and Sarah hadn't thought to check. The mortgage, nearly paid off, was in her name too. She'd been making payments faithfully, even as Sarah demanded rent. But now, she made a decision that felt both reckless and right. She stopped the mortgage payments. If Sarah wanted to play hardball, Eleanor would play harder. Weeks passed, and the first notice arrived from the bank. Eleanor tucked it away, her heart pounding. Sarah didn't notice. She was too busy planning a remodel of the living room. But Eleanor knew what was coming. Foreclosure was a slow beast, but it was coming. And when it did, she'd be ready. She started small acts of defiance. She moved Arthur's books back to the study, reclaiming the space. She tended the garden, planting new roses in bold colors that screamed life. Sarah complained, but Eleanor just smiled, saying, "It's my house, dear." The words felt like armor. One night, Sarah confronted her in the kitchen. "You're not pulling your weight, Eleanor," she snapped. "Pay up or get out." Eleanor's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "This is my home. Sarah, I'm not going anywhere. Sarah's face twisted, but Eleanor held her ground, feeling Arthur's strength in her bones. The bank notices piled up. Eleanor read each one, her plan taking shape. She wasn't just letting the house slip away, she was taking control. If Sarah wanted to treat her like a tenant, she'd remind them who owned this place. She'd lose the house. Yes, but she'd lose it on her terms, not Sarah's. By the time the foreclosure notice arrived, Eleanor was ready. She'd contacted a lawyer, an old friend of Arthur's, who helped her navigate the process. The house would go to auction, but Eleanor had a plan to buy it back. She'd saved enough, scrimping on everything but the essentials, to make a bid. It was risky, her savings might not be enough, but it was her last stand. The day of the auction, Eleanor stood outside the courthouse, her heart racing. Sarah and Michael were there, oblivious to the storm they'd unleashed. They thought they'd win, that Eleanor would fade quietly into the background. But Eleanor Grayson wasn't done fighting. Not for her home. Not for her dignity. Not for the life she and Arthur had built. The courthouse steps were cold under Eleanor's feet, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. She clutched her purse, where she'd tucked every penny she could muster, her savings, a small loan from her sister, and the last of Arthur's life insurance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a stand. The crowd around her buzzed with anticipation, real estate vultures circling for a bargain. Eleanor didn't care about them. Her eyes were fixed on the auctioneer, a stern man in a gray suit, as he called out properties like they were nothing more than numbers. Sarah and Michael stood a few feet away, whispering to each other. Sarah's face was smug, her arms crossed as if she'd already won. Michael looked uneasy, his eyes darting to Eleanor, but he said nothing. Eleanor felt a pang of sorrow for her son, but it was drowned out by the fire in her chest. She'd given him everything: love, a home, a future, and he'd let Sarah turn her into a stranger. Today, she'd show them both who she was. The auctioneer called her address, 1427 Maple Lane. Eleanor's heart skipped. This was it. The house where she'd raised her children, where Arthur had proposed on one knee in the backyard, where every scratch on the floor told a story. The bidding started low, and Eleanor waited, her breath shallow. She'd told her lawyer, Mr. Callahan, to bid only when the moment was right. She couldn't afford to get caught in a frenzy. A young couple bid first, then a man in a slick suit. The price crept up, each number tightening the knot in Eleanor's stomach. Sarah smirked, probably thinking she'd swoop in and claim the house for a steal. But Eleanor had done her homework. She knew the bank's minimum, knew the market. She'd planned this down to the penny. When the bid slowed, Mr. Callahan raised his hand. $220. 000, he said, his voice steady. The crowd murmured. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Eleanor met her gaze, unflinching. Another bid came, then another. Mr. Callahan countered, pushing the price higher. Eleanor's savings were dwindling in her mind, each bid a gamble. But she wasn't backing down. At $245. 000. The other bidders hesitated. The man in the suit shook his head, stepping back. The young couple whispered furiously but stayed silent. Sarah leaned toward Michael, her voice sharp. Do something, she hissed. Michael opened his mouth, but no bid came. Eleanor's heart pounded. This was her moment. $250. 000. Mr. Callahan called. The auctioneer scanned the crowd. Going once, going twice. Sarah's face paled. She grabbed Michael's arm, but he froze. Sold. the auctioneer declared, banging his gavel. Eleanor exhaled, her knees weak. She'd done it. The house was hers again. Sarah stormed over, her face red. What did you do? She demanded. You let the house go to auction. Are you insane? Eleanor straightened, her voice calm but ironclad. I didn't let it go, Sarah. I took it back. This is my home, not your rental property. Michael finally spoke, his voice low. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Eleanor looked at him. Her son, the boy she'd rocked to sleep. Now a man who'd let her down. Because you stopped listening, she said softly. You chose her demands over me. The walk back to the house felt like a pilgrimage. Eleanor's steps were slow but sure, each one reclaiming the ground she'd nearly lost. When she unlocked the door, the familiar scent of wood and roses greeted her. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. Sarah and Michael would have to move out. The lawyer had already started the eviction process. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. That night, Eleanor sat in Arthur's study, surrounded by his books. She opened one, an old poetry collection, and found a note in his handwriting for Eleanor. My home. Tears welled, but they weren't just grief. They were pride, relief, strength. She'd fought for their home, for their legacy, and she'd won. The next morning, she called her daughter, Lily, who lived across the country. Lily had always been her rock, the one who called every week, who sent letters and photos of her own kids. Mom, I'm so proud of you, Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. Come visit us. Bring the grandkids. We'll make new memories. Eleanor smiled, the weight of the past months lifting. She'd lost Michael, at least for now, but she hadn't lost herself. Over the next few days, Eleanor began restoring the house. She painted the walls, hung new curtains, and replanted the garden. Neighbors stopped by, offering support, sharing stories of their own battles. Eleanor realized she wasn't alone. Her community, her history, was still here, rooting for her. Sarah and Michael moved out a week later, their belongings packed in a hurry. Sarah didn't speak, but Michael lingered at the door. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. I hope you find your way, Michael, she said. But this is my home. With Sarah and Michael gone, the house felt both empty and alive. Eleanor wandered through the rooms, each one whispering memories of better days. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was hers. She reclaimed the master bedroom, moving her things back from the guest room. The act felt like putting on an old, favorite coat, familiar and warm. She hung a photo of Arthur above the bed, his smile a quiet promise that she'd done the right thing. But the victory was bittersweet. Eleanor missed her grandchildren, Emma and Noah, whose laughter had once filled the house. Sarah had kept them at arm's length, but Eleanor had always found ways to sneak them cookies, read them stories, or teach them how to plant seeds in the garden. Now, their toys were gone, their voices just echoes. She wondered if they'd understand, if they'd ever know why their grandma had fought so hard. She threw herself into restoring the house, not just its walls, but its spirit. She invited neighbors over, hosting coffee mornings in the kitchen where Sarah had once berated her. The community rallied around her, bringing casseroles and stories, reminding her that family wasn't just blood, it was the people who showed up. Mrs. Henderson from next door shared her own tale of standing up to a greedy landlord, her eyes twinkling as she toasted Eleanor's courage. You showed him, Ellie, she said, raising her mug. Eleanor also reached out to Lily, who insisted on flying in to help. When Lily arrived, her embrace was a lifeline. They spent days sorting through old photos, laughing and crying over memories of Arthur, of Michael as a boy, of the life they'd all shared. Lily urged Eleanor to write down her story, to keep it for Emma and Noah. They'll need to know who their grandma is, Lily said. Not just the woman who lost her house, but the one who fought for it. So Eleanor wrote. She sat in Arthur's study, pen in hand, pouring her heart onto the page. She wrote about the auction, the betrayal, the roses she'd replanted. She wrote about love not just for Arthur, but for herself, for the strength she'd rediscovered. The words flowed, raw and honest, a testament to her resilience. She hoped one day her grandchildren would read it and understand. But the house wasn't just a monument to the past. It was a canvas for the future. Eleanor started hosting gardening classes in the backyard, teaching kids from the neighborhood how to plant and nurture. Their small hands in the dirt reminded her of Emma and Noah. And though it ached, it also healed. She was building something new, something hers. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Michael. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it. Mom, it read, I messed up. Sarah's gone. She left me and the kids. I didn't see how much I hurt you. I want to make this right, but I don't know how. Enclosed was a photo of Emma and Noah, smiling in a park. Eleanor's eyes stung. She wanted to forgive him, but trust was a fragile thing, and he'd broken it. She called Lily, reading her the letter. What do I do? She asked. Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, You don't owe him anything, Mom. But if you want the kids in your life, you'll have to find a way to meet him halfway. Not for him, for them. Eleanor nodded, though Lily couldn't see. She knew her daughter was right. That night, Eleanor walked through the garden, the roses glowing under the moonlight. She thought of Arthur, of the promises they'd made to each other. We built this for family, she whispered. She decided to invite Michael and the kids for a visit, not to move in, but to start rebuilding. She'd set boundaries, protect her home, her heart, but she wouldn't shut them out. The next day, she called Michael. His voice was hesitant, raw with regret. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said again. Eleanor listened, her heart softening but not yielding. Come for dinner, she said. Bring Emma and Noah. We'll talk. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a step. When they arrived, Emma and Noah ran to her, their arms wrapping around her like they'd never left. Eleanor held them close, tears falling into their hair. Michael stood back, his eyes downcast. Over dinner, they talked awkwardly at first, then with glimmers of the past. Eleanor saw the boy she'd raised, buried under years of mistakes. She didn't know if they'd ever be whole again, but she'd try. For the kids. For Arthur. For herself. Dinner with Michael and the grandchildren became a weekly ritual, a fragile bridge between the past and a possible future. Eleanor set the table with care, using the old china she and Arthur had bought for their first anniversary. Emma and Noah's chatter filled the house, their stories of school and friends a balm to Eleanor's heart. Michael was quieter, his apologies woven into small gestures, washing dishes, fixing a loose porch rail. He was trying, and Eleanor saw it, but the wounds were still fresh. She kept her boundaries firm. The guest room stayed empty. This was her home, not a boarding house. When Michael hinted at moving back, Eleanor was clear. You're welcome to visit, but this is my space now, she said, her voice steady but kind. Michael nodded, accepting her terms. It was a start. Eleanor's gardening classes grew, drawing more kids and even a few parents. The backyard became a community hub, alive with laughter and the scent of blooming roses. She taught the children how to prune, how to coax life from the soil, and in return, they gave her purpose. One girl, Mia, reminded her of Emma Bright. Curious, unafraid to get her hands dirty. When Mia's mother thanked Eleanor for giving her daughter confidence, Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. But the house still held ghosts. Eleanor found herself pausing in doorways, remembering Sarah's sharp words, Michael's silence. She wrote more, filling notebooks with her thoughts. Lily suggested turning them into a memoir, but Eleanor wasn't sure. It's just for me, she said, though she mailed copies to Lily, who read them with tears and pride. One evening, Michael brought up Sarah. She's living with her sister now, he said, his voice low. She wants to see the kids, but I don't know if I trust her. Eleanor listened, her heart torn. She knew the pain of losing family, but she also knew Sarah's cruelty. Do what's best for Emma and Noah, she said, but protect yourself too. Michael nodded, and for the first time, Eleanor saw a spark of the man he could be. The community rallied around Eleanor in unexpected ways. When a storm damaged the roof, neighbors showed up with tools and tarps, refusing to let her pay. Mr. Henderson, a retired carpenter, fixed the porch swing Arthur had built. This house is a landmark, he said, grinning. Can't let it fall apart. Eleanor baked pies in thanks, her kitchen alive with the scent of apples and cinnamon. She also reconnected with old friends, people she'd drifted from during the chaos with Sarah. They met for tea, shared stories, laughed until their sides ached. Eleanor realized how much she'd isolated herself, letting Sarah's demands consume her. Now, she was rebuilding not just her home, but her life. One day, Emma asked about the roses. Why do you love them so much, Grandma? She said, her small hand in Eleanor's as they walked through the garden. Eleanor knelt, touching a red bloom. Your grandpa planted these, she said. Each one's a promise to keep going, to find beauty even when things are hard. Emma nodded, her eyes serious, and Eleanor felt a surge of hope. She was passing something down, something Sarah couldn't take. Michael started joining the gardening classes, bringing Emma and Noah. He was clumsy with the shears, but his effort made Eleanor smile. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, he said, I want to be better, Mom. For you. For them. Eleanor looked at him, seeing the boy who'd once run to her with scraped knees. Then keep showing up, she said. That's how you start. By winter, the house was transformed. New paint, new curtains, a new sense of peace. Eleanor hosted a Christmas party, inviting neighbors, friends, and Lily's family. The living room glowed with lights, the air thick with laughter and carols. Michael brought the kids, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt whole. She looked around, at the faces, the roses outside, the photo of Arthur on the mantel. This was her home, her victory, her life. Winter settled over Maple Lane, blanketing Eleanor's house in quiet snow. The roses slept under frost, but the garden still felt alive, a testament to her resilience. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the scent of pine and the soft glow of the Christmas lights she'd hung with Emma and Noah. The party had been a triumph, a marker of how far she'd come. But Eleanor knew healing wasn't a straight line. There were still days when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she'd been too hard, too unforgiving. Michael was trying harder now. He'd found a job, a steady one at a local hardware store, and rented a small apartment for himself and the kids. He brought them to Eleanor's every weekend, and their visits were the highlight of her week. Noah would draw pictures of the garden, taping them to her fridge, while Emma asked endless questions about Arthur, hungry for stories about the grandfather she'd never met. Eleanor told them everything, weaving tales of his kindness, his stubborn streak, his love for this house. But Sarah lingered like a shadow. Michael mentioned she'd called, asking to see the kids. Eleanor felt a knot in her chest, remembering the venom in Sarah's voice, the way she'd turned her home into a battleground. Yet she saw the longing in Emma and Noah's eyes when they spoke of their mother. "They need her, Mom," Michael said one evening, his voice heavy. "But I don't know how to let her back in." Eleanor sighed, her heart torn between justice and compassion. "Set rules," she said. "Love them, but don't let her hurt you again." Eleanor's memoir grew, each page a step toward understanding herself. She wrote about the auction, the fear, the triumph. She wrote about Michael's betrayal and his slow return. She wrote about Arthur, whose memory was her anchor. Lily read every draft, calling with edits and encouragement. "This isn't just your story, Mom," she said. "It's for anyone who's ever had to fight for what's theirs." Eleanor began to believe her, and when a local publisher expressed interest, she felt a spark of pride. The gardening classes became a lifeline for the community. Parents brought their kids, and soon, adults joined too, learning to plant vegetables, herbs, roses. Eleanor loved watching them discover the joy of growth, the patience it demanded. One day, Mia's mother brought a proposal: turn the classes into a nonprofit, a way to teach kids across town. Eleanor hesitated. She was 70. Not exactly looking to start a business, but the idea took root. With Lily's help, she drafted a plan, and the Maple Lane Garden Project was born. Michael volunteered, bringing tools and ideas. He was different now, more present, less shadowed by Sarah's influence. One afternoon, as they built raised garden beds, he said, "I'm proud of you, Mom. I didn't see it before, but you're unstoppable." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. "I had to be," she said. "For me. For you." The kids thrived in the garden, their hands dirty, their faces bright. Emma started a journal, sketching plants and writing poems. Noah, quieter, found peace in the soil, his shy smiles a gift. Eleanor saw Arthur in them, in their curiosity, their resilience. She began to forgive Michael, not all at once, but in small moments, when he laughed with Noah, when he fixed a broken fence without being asked. One spring day, Sarah appeared at the gate. Eleanor froze, her pruning shears still in hand. Sarah looked different, thinner, her eyes tired. "I want to see them," she said, her voice softer than Eleanor remembered. "I know I messed up." Eleanor studied her, weighing her words. "You hurt us," she said, "but they're your kids. Talk to Michael. Prove you've changed." Sarah nodded, and Eleanor saw a flicker of the woman she might have been before ambition twisted her. That night, Eleanor wrote in her memoir, "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing to build instead of burn." She wasn't sure if she'd ever trust Sarah, but for Emma and Noah, she'd try. The house, the garden, her heart, they were strong enough to hold space for second chances. Spring brought new life to Maple Lane. The roses bloomed brighter than ever, their petals a riot of red and pink against the green. Eleanor's garden project flourished, with volunteers turning her backyard into a community haven. Kids from across town came to learn, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees. Eleanor felt Arthur's presence in every bud, every smile. This was the legacy she'd fought for, not just a house, but a home for hope. Michael was a constant now, not just a visitor. He'd grown into a father Eleanor was proud of, patient with Emma and Noah, steady in his work. He'd started therapy, confronting the mistakes that had led him to side with Sarah. I was weak, Mom, he admitted one evening, sitting on the porch swing. I let her control me. Eleanor squeezed his hand. You're here now? She said. That's what matters. Sarah's return was slow, cautious. She met the kids at a park, supervised by Michael. Eleanor stayed out of it, trusting him to protect their hearts. Emma and Noah came back from their first visit quiet but hopeful, clutching drawings they'd made for their mother. Eleanor listened to their stories, her heart aching but open. She didn't know if Sarah could change, but she prayed she would, for the kids' sake. The memoir was published, a small run by the local press. Titled My Home, My Fight. It sold out at the community center, where Eleanor gave a reading. Neighbors and strangers alike came, some with their own stories of standing up, of reclaiming what was theirs. A woman in her 60s hugged Eleanor, tears in her eyes. You gave me courage, she said. Eleanor felt humbled, her story now a spark for others. The garden project grew, securing a grant to expand to a nearby lot. Eleanor trained new teachers, passing on her knowledge. Mia, now a teenager, became her right hand, her enthusiasm infectious. You're like my grandma, Mia said one day, and Eleanor's heart swelled. She'd lost so much, but she'd gained a family beyond blood. One summer evening, Eleanor hosted a garden party. The backyard was alive with lights, music, and the scent of roses. Michael brought Emma and Noah, who ran through the crowd, their laughter a melody. Lily flew in, her kids in tow, and the house rang with voices. Even Sarah came, standing awkwardly at the edge. Eleanor greeted her, not warmly but civilly. For the kids, she said, and Sarah nodded, a silent agreement. As the sun set, Eleanor stood on the porch, watching her world. The house, once nearly lost, was hers in every way, paid for, fought for, loved. She thought of Arthur, of the promises they'd made. She'd kept them, not just for him, but for herself. The pain of the past, Sarah's cruelty, Michael's betrayal hadn't broken her. It had forged her. She walked to the garden, touching a rose. We did it, she whispered to Arthur, to the house, to the woman she'd become. The stars above Maple Lane shone bright, and Eleanor Grayson knew she was home.